Thus was I expelled from the convent, and thus did the monks deliver me over to the hands of death. I fought through the night blindly. The heavy wind was tearing my robe, and the piling snow was trapping my feet and pulling me down until I fell, crying desperately for help. I felt that no one heard me except death, but a power which is all knowledge and mercy had heard my cry. That power did not want me to die before I had learned what is left of life's secrets. That power sent you, both to me and to save my life from the depth of the abyss and non-existence. Rachel and Miriam felt as if their spirits understood the mystery of his soul, and they became his partners in feeling and understanding. Notwithstanding her will, Rachel stretched forth and gently touched his hand, while tears coursed down from her eyes, and she said, "He who has been chosen by heaven as a defender of truth will not perish by heaven's own storms and snow." And Miriam added, "The storms and snow may kill the flowers, but cannot deaden the seeds, for the snow keeps them warm from the killing frost." Khalil's face brightened upon hearing those words of encouragement, and he said, "If you do not look upon me as a rebel and a heretic, as the monks did, the persecution which I have sustained in the convent is the symbol of an oppressed nation that has not yet attained knowledge, and this night in which I was on the verge of death is like a revolution that precedes full justice, and from a sensitive woman's heart springs the happiness of mankind, and from the kindness of her noble spirit comes mankind's affection." He closed his eyes and leaned down on the pillow. The two women did not bother him with further conversation, for they knew that the weariness caused by long exposure had allured and captured his eyes. Khalil slept like a lost child who had finally found safety in his mother's arms. Rachel and her daughter slowly walked to their bed and sat there watching him as if they had found in his trouble, torn face an attraction bringing their souls and hearts closer to him. And the mother whispered, saying, "There is a strange power in his closed eyes that speaks in silence and stimulates the soul's desires." And Miriam rejoined, "His hands, mother, are like those of Christ in the church." The mother replied, "His face possesses at the same time a woman's tenderness and a man's boldness." And the wings of slumber carried the women's spirits into the world of dream, and the fire went down and turned into ashes, while the light of the oil lamp dimmed gradually and disappeared. The fierce tempest continued its roar, and the obscured sky spread layers of snow, and the strong wind scattered them to the right and left. Part 4. 5 days passed, and the sky was still heavy with snow, burying the mountains and prairies relentlessly. Khalil made 3 attempts to resume his journey toward the plains, but Rachel restrained him each time, saying, "Do not give up your life to the blind elements, brother. Remain here, for the bread that suffices 2 will also feed 3, and the fire will still be burning after your departure, as it was before your arrival. We are poor, brother, but like the rest of the people, we live our lives before the face of the sun and mankind, and God gives us our daily bread." And Miriam was begging him with her kind glances and pleading with her deep sighs, for since he entered the hut, she felt the presence of a divine power in her soul, sending forth life and light into her heart and awakening new affection in the holy of holies of her spirit. For the first time she experienced the feeling which made her heart like a white rose that sips the dewdrops from the dawn and breathes its fragrance into the endless firmament. There is no affection purer and more soothing to the spirit than the one hidden in the heart of a maiden who awakens suddenly and fills her own spirit with heavenly music that makes her days like poets' dreams and her nights prophetic. There is no secret in the mystery of life stronger and more beautiful than the attachment which converts the silence of a virgin spirit into a perpetual awareness that makes a person forget the past, for it kindles fiercely in his heart the sweet and overwhelming hope of the coming future. The Lebanese woman distinguishes herself from the women of other nations by her simplicity. The manner in which she is trained restricts her progress educationally and stands as a hindrance to her future. Yet, for this reason, she finds herself inquiring of herself as to the inclination and mystery of her heart. The Lebanese young woman is like a spring that comes out from the heart of the earth and follows its course through winding depressions, but since it cannot find an outlet to the sea, it turns into a calm lake that reflects upon its growing surface the glittering stars and the shining moon. Khalil felt the vibration of Miriam's heart twining steadily about his soul, and he knew that the divine torch that illuminated his heart had also touched her heart. He rejoiced for the first time like a parched brook greeting the rain, but he blamed himself for his hate, believing that this spiritual understanding would pass like a cloud when he departed from the village. From that village, he often spoke to himself, saying, "What is this mystery that plays so great a part in our lives? What is this law that drives us into a rough road and stops us just before we reach the face of the sun, where we might rejoice? What is this power that elevates our spirits until we reach the mountain top, smiling and glorying? Then suddenly we are cast to the depths of the valley, weeping and suffering. What is this life that embraces us like a lover one day and fights us like an enemy the second day? Was I not persecuted yesterday? Did I not survive hunger and thirst and suffering and mockery for the sake of the truth which heaven had awakened in my heart? Did I not tell the monks that happiness through truth is the will and the purpose of God in man? Then what is this fear, and why do I close my eyes to the light that emanates from the young woman's eyes? I am expelled, and she is poor, but is it on bread only that man can live? Are we not between famine and plenty, like trees between winter and summer? But what would Rachel say if she knew that my heart and her daughter's heart came to an understanding in silence and approached close to each other and neared the circle of the supreme light? What would she say if she discovered that the young man whose life she saved longed to gaze upon her daughter? What would the simple villagers say if they knew that a young man reared in the convent came to their village by necessity and expulsion and desired to live near a beautiful maiden? Will they listen to me if I tell them that he who leaves the convent to live amongst them is like a bird that flies from the bruising walls of the cage to the light of freedom? What will Sheikh Abbas say if he hears my story? What will the priest of the village do if he learns of the cause for my expulsion?" Khalil was talking to himself in this fashion while sitting by the fireplace, meditating the flames, symbol of his love, and Miriam was stealing a glance now and then at his face and reading his dreams through his eyes, and hearing the echo of his thoughts, and feeling the touch of his love, even though no word was uttered. One night, as he stood by the small transom that faced the valleys, where the trees and rocks were shrouded with white coverings, Miriam came and stood by him, looking at the sky, and their eyes turned and met. He drew a deep sigh and shut his eyes as if his soul were sailing in the spacious sky, looking for a word. He found no word necessary, for the silence spoke for them. Miriam ventured, "Where will you go when the snow meets the stream and the paths are dry?" His eyes opened, looking beyond the horizon, and he explained, "I shall follow the path to wherever my destiny and my mission for truth shall take me." Miriam sighed sadly and offered, "Why will you not remain here and live close to us? Is it that you are obliged to go elsewhere?" He was moved by her kindness and sweet words, but protested, "The villagers here will not accept an expelled monk as their neighbor, and will not permit him to breathe the air they breathe, because they believe that the enemy of the convent is an infidel, cursed by God and his saints." Miriam resorted to silence, for the truth that pained her prevented further talk. Then Khalil turned aside and explained, "Miriam, these villagers are taught by those in authority to hate everyone who thinks freely. They are trained to remain afar from those whose minds soar aloft. God does not like to be worshipped by an ignorant man who imitates someone else. No. Any good deed, any good belief, even if not intelligently picked up. But yeah, there's a better way. Yes, and, God likes good and truth, no matter who sits in. If I remained in this village and asked the people to worship as they please, they would say that I am an infidel, disobeying the authority that was given to the priest by God. If I asked them to listen and hear the voices of their hearts and do according to the will of the Spirit within, they would say that I am an evil man who wants them to do away with the clergy that God placed between heaven and earth." Well, if they knew their Bibles better, they wouldn't. They'd see reasons why that's not the only option. Khalil looked straight into Miriam's eyes, and with a voice that bespoke the sound of silver strings said, "But Miriam, there is a magic power in this village that possesses me and engulfs my soul, a power so divine that it causes me to forget my pain. In this village I met death to his very face, and in this place my soul embraced God's Spirit. In this village there is a beautiful flower grown over the lifeless grass. Its beauty attracts my heart, and its fragrance fills its domain. Shall I leave this important flower and go out preaching the ideas that caused my expulsion from the convent, or shall I remain by the side of that flower and dig a grave and bury my thoughts and truths among its neighboring thorns? What shall I do, Miriam?" Upon hearing these words, she shivered like a lily before the frolicsome breeze of the dawn. Her heart glowed through her eyes when she faltered, "We are both in the hands of a mysterious and merciful power. Let it do its will." At that moment, the two hearts joined, and thereafter both spirits were one burning torch, illuminating their lives. Part 5. People have to not be together for different reasons, and sometimes that doesn't mean they're not soulmates. Since the beginning of the creation and up to our present time, certain clans, rich by inheritance, in cooperation with the clergy, had appointed themselves the administrators of the people. It is an old, gaping wound in the heart of society that cannot be removed except by intense removal of ignorance. The man who acquires his wealth by inheritance builds his mansion with the weak poor's money. The clergyman erects his temple upon the graves and bones of the devoted worshippers. The prince grasps the fellow's arms, while the priest empties his pocket. The ruler looks upon the sons of the field with a frowning face, and the bishop consoles them with his smile. And between the frown of the tiger and the smile of the wolf, the flock is perished. The ruler claims himself as king of the law, and the priest as the representative of God. And between these two, the bodies are destroyed and the souls wither into nothing. In Lebanon, that mountain rich in sunlight and poor in knowledge, the noble and the priest joined hands to exploit the farmer who plowed the land and reaped the crop in order to protect himself from the sword of the ruler and the curse of the priest. The rich man in Lebanon stood proudly by his palace and shouted at the multitude, saying, "The Sultan has appointed me as your lord." And the priest stands before the altar, saying, "God has delegated me as an executive of your souls." But the Lebanese resorted to silence, for the dead could not talk. Sheikh Abbas had friendship in his heart for the clergymen, because they were his allies in choking this people's knowledge and reviving the spirit of stern obedience among his workers. That evening, when Khalil and Miriam were approaching the throne of love, and Rachel was looking upon them with the eyes of affection, Father Elias informed Sheikh Abbas that the head priest had expelled a rebellious young man from the convent, and that he had taken refuge at the house of Rachel, the widow of Saman Rami, and the priest was not satisfied with the little information he gave the sheikh, but commented, "The demon they chased out of the convent cannot become an angel in this village, and the fig tree which is hewn and cast into the fire does not bear fruit while burning. If we wish to clean this village of the filth of this beast, we must drive him away as the monks did." And the sheikh inquired, "Are you certain that the young man will be a bad influence upon our people? Is it not better for us to keep him and make him a worker in our vineyards? We are in need of strong men." The priest's face showed his disagreement. Combing his beard with his fingers, he said shrewdly, "If he were fit to work, he would not have been expelled from the convent. A student who works in the convent, and who happened to spend last night at my house, informed me that this young man had violated the rules of the head priest by preaching danger-ridden ideas among the monks, and he quoted him as saying, 'Restore the fields and the vineyards and the silver of the convent to the poor, and scatter it in all directions, and help the people who are in need of knowledge, and by thus doing you will please your Father in heaven.'" On hearing these words, Sheikh Abbas leaped to his feet, and like a tiger making ready to strike the victim, he walked to the door and called to the servants, ordering them to report immediately. 3 men entered, and the sheikh commanded, "In the house of Rachel, the widow of Saman Rami, there is a young man wearing a monk's raiment. Tie him and bring him here. If that woman objects to his arrest, drag her out by her braided hair over the snow and bring her with him. For he who helps evil is evil himself." The men bowed obediently and hurried to Rachel's home, while the priest and the sheikh discussed the type of punishment to be awarded to Khalil and Rachel. Part 6. The day was over, and the night had come, spreading its shadow over those wretched huts, heavily laden with snow. the stars finally appeared in the sky, like hopes in the coming eternity. After the suffering of death's agony, the doors and windows were closed and the lamps were lighted. The Fellahin sat by the fireside warming their bodies. Rachel, Miriam, and Khalil were seated at a rough wooden table, eating their evening meal, when there was a knock at the door and 3 men entered. Rachel, Miriam, and Khalil were seated at a rough wooden table, eating their evening meal. Rachel and Miriam were frightened, but Khalil remained calm, as if he had awaited the coming of those men. One of the sheikh's servants walked toward Khalil, laid his hand upon his shoulder, and asked, "Are you the one who was expelled from the convent?" And Khalil responded, "Yes, I'm the one. What do you want?" The man replied, "We are ordered to arrest you and take you with us to Sheikh Abbas's home. And if you object, we shall drag you out like a butchered sheep over the snow." Rachel turned pale as she exclaimed, "What crime has he committed? And why do you want to tie him and drag him out?" The 2 women pleaded with tearful voices, saying, "He is one individual in the hands of 3, and it is cowardly of you to make him suffer." The men became enraged and shouted, "Is there any woman in this village who opposes the sheikh's order?" And he drew forth a rope and started to tie Khalil's hands. Khalil lifted his head proudly, and a sorrowful smile appeared on his lips when he said, "I feel sorry for you men, because you are a strong and blind instrument in the hands of a man who oppresses the weak with the strength of your arms. You are slaves of ignorance. Yesterday I was a man like you, but tomorrow you shall be free in mind as I am now. Between us there is a deep precipice that chokes my calling voice and hides my reality from you, and you cannot hear or see. Here I am. Tie my hands and do as you please." The 3 men were moved by his talk, and it seemed that his voice had awakened in them a new spirit, but the voice of Sheikh Abbas still rang in their minds, warning them to complete the mission. They bound his hands and led him out silently with a heavy conscience. Rachel and Miriam followed them to the Sheikh's home, like the daughters of Jerusalem who followed Christ to Mount Calvary. Well, of course, we know that that's an add-on to that story, just like the crucifixion part. But part 7, well, let me note that no matter what type of government you have, it requires a certain amount of permission from the people. Well, not all the people, but certain percentage of the people, and then maybe a certain amount from the people who don't want that type of government. Regardless of its import, news travels swiftly among the Fellahin in the small villages, because their absence from the realm of society makes them anxious and busy in discussing the happenings of their limited environs. In winter, when the fields are slumbering under the quilts of snow, and when human life is taking refuge and warming itself by the fireside, the villagers become most inclined to learn of current news in order to occupy themselves. It was not long after Khalil was arrested when the story spread like a contagious disease amongst the villagers. They left their huts and hurried like an army from every direction into the home of Sheikh Abbas. When Khalil's feet stepped in the Sheikh's home, the residence was crowded with men, women, and children who were endeavoring for a glance at the infidel who was expelled from the convent. They were also anxious to see Rachel and her daughter, who would help Khalil in spreading the hellish disease of heresy in the pure sky of their village. The Sheikh took the seat of judgment, and beside him sat Father Elias, while the throng was gazing at the pinioned youth who stood bravely before them. Rachel and Miriam were standing behind Khalil and trembling with fear. But what could fear do to the heart of a woman who found truth and followed him. Remember, heresy is just authentically having your own opinion. It's not quite the same as rebellion for rebellion's sake or anything like that. What could the scorn of the crowd do to the soul of a maiden who had been awakened by love? Sheikh Abbas looked at the young man, and with a thundering voice he interrogated him, saying, "What is your name, man?" "Khalil is my name," answered the youth. The sheikh returned, "Who are your father and mother and relatives, and where were you born?" Khalil turned toward the fellahin, who looked upon him with hateful eyes and said, "The oppressed poor are my clan and my relatives, and this vast country is my birthplace." Sheikh Abbas, with an air of ridicule, said, "Those people whom you claim as kin demand that you be punished, and the country you assert as your birthplace objects to your being a member of its people." Khalil replied, "The ignorant nations arrest their good men and turn them into their despots, and a country ruled by a tyrant persecutes those who try to free the people from the yoke of slavery. But will a good son leave his mother if she is ill? Will a merciful man deny his brother who is miserable? Those poor men who arrested me and brought me here today are the same ones who surrendered their lives to you yesterday. And this vast earth that disapproves my existence is the one that does not yawn and swallow the greedy despots." The sheikh uttered a loud laugh as if wanting to depress the young man's spirit and prevent him from influencing the audience. He turned to Khalil and said impressively, "You cattle grazier, do you think that we will show mercy? More mercy than did the monks who expelled you from the convent? Do you think that we feel pity for a dangerous agitator?" Khalil responded, "It is true that I was a cattle grazier, but I am glad that I was not a butcher. I led my herds to the rich pastures and never grazed them on arid land. I led my animals to pure springs and kept them from contaminated marshes. At eventide I brought them safely to their shed and never left them in the valleys as prey for the wolves. Thus I have treated the animals, and if you had pursued my course and treated human beings as I treated my flock, these poor people would not live in wretched huts and suffer the pangs of poverty while you were living like Nero in this gorgeous mansion." The sheikh's forehead glittered with drops of perspiration, and a smirk turned into anger, but he tried to show only calm by pretending that he did not heed Khalil's talk, and he expostulated, pointing at Khalil with his finger. "You are a heretic, and we shall not listen to your ridiculous talk. We summoned you to be tried as a criminal, and you realize that you are in the presence of the lord of this village, who is empowered to represent His Excellency Amir Amin Shabab. You are standing before Father Elias, the representative of the Holy Church, whose teachings you have opposed. Now defend yourself or kneel down before these people, and we will pardon you and make you a cattle grazier as you were in the convent." Khalil calmly returned, "A criminal is not to be tried by another criminal, as an atheist will not defend himself before sinners." And Khalil looked at the audience and spoke to them, saying, "My brethren, the man whom you call the Lord of your fields, and to whom you have yielded thus long, has brought me to be tried before you in this edifice which he built upon the graves of your forefathers. And the man who became a pastor of your church through your faith has come to judge me and help you to humiliate me and increase my sufferings. You have hurried to this place from every direction to see me suffer and hear me plead for mercy. You have left your huts in order to witness your pinioned son and brother. You have come to see the prey trembling between the paws of a ferocious beast. You came here tonight to view an infidel standing before the judges. I am the criminal, and I am the heretic who has been expelled from the convent. The tempest brought me into your village. Listen to my protest, and do not be merciful, but be just, for mercy is bestowed upon the guilty criminal, while justice is all that an innocent man requires. I select you now as my jury, because the will of the people is the will of God. Awaken your hearts and listen carefully, and then prosecute me according to the dictates of your conscience. You have been told that I am an infidel, but you have not been informed of what crime or sin I have committed. You have seen me tied like a thief, but you have not heard about my offenses, for wrongdoings are not revealed in this court, while punishment comes out like thunder. My crime, dear fellow men, is my understanding of your plight, for I felt the weight of the irons which have been placed upon your necks. My sin is my heartfelt sorrows for your women. It is my sympathy for your children who suck life from your breast, mixed with the shadow of death. I am one of you, and my forefathers lived in these valleys and died under the same yoke which is now which is bending your heads now. I believe in God who listens to the call of your suffering souls, and I believe in the book that makes all of us brothers before the face of heaven. I believe in the teachings that make us all equal and that render us unpinioned upon this earth, the stepping place of the careful feet of God. And I was grazing my cows at the convent and contemplating the sorrowful condition you tolerate. I heard a desperate cry coming from your miserable homes, a cry of oppressed souls, a cry of broken hearts, which are locked in your bodies as slaves to the Lord of these fields. Just like in Exodus 33, and some we see what God's left behind. All we notice is the footprints and some of the Hindu stories, and we find the presence of God in the lowliest of things sometimes.